Hey, it's Drybear, and we need to talk about Subnautica 2. Subnautica is probably one of the more beloved games in the history of gaming, to be honest. It's definitely one of my favorite survival games, and even though it doesn't have the same hard-hitting aspects as like Green Hell, for example, it has one of the best atmosphere, story development, and just general vibe you can get. I've played through Below Zero and Subnautica 1 so many times I can't even count, and I'm definitely excited about Subnautica 2 coming out. And I put this out a couple months ago, but they have been, kind of moving towards and speeding towards a 2025 early access release for Subnautica 2 with limited showing from the dev side of things. But there has been a recent development about a week ago and of course yesterday as well that we need to get caught up on for the game. And it's worth talking about because if you look at the top wish lists on Steam, now obviously this is PC, but the top wish lists on Steam, Subnautica 2 is number 2. I don't know if anything is going to dethrone Silksong, the game that we're all just hoping that the Hollow Knight 2 comes out. Like Silksong actual releases. It's been announced for a long time and it's just been like, like freaking Bloodborne PC. It's just been this long, far off, distant memory dream that we have about the game. But Subnautica 2 being number 2 is very, very intense. There's a lot of games on here that are very popular and expected, and Subnautica 2 is way up there on the player list. So let's get everyone up to speed so we're all on the same page before we talk about the latest news, because it's something that I didn't cover last week. But basically on July 2nd, Krafton put out an announcement for the development of Subnautica 2 and Unknown Worlds. They had done a complete leadership reshuffle for Krafton, and this caused a lot of people to panic and freak out about the development of the game because 3 of the people that were removed from their executive roles at Krafton and for Subnautica 2 have been there since the beginning. Like, they are the original creators of Subnautica 1, Subnautica Below Zero, and some of the spin-offs and other things they've done has been these 3 dudes. And so them being forcibly ejected from the company so they could bring in another CEO is very concerning in a world where we're constantly seeing, games being gutted and cannibalized by microtransactions or greedy practices, or people that, want to run it like a business that don't actually play games or enjoy them. And so a lot of times you get these kind of hollow game releases where people end up creating games that aren't for anybody. Like, no one wants to play them. They're not made by a gamer. They're just made to make money. And so they end up feeling kind of hollow in that front. So what exactly happened? 3 guys, Ted Gill, Charlie Cleveland, and Max McGuire, some of the original heads for Unknown Worlds and the co-creators and original creators of Subnautica 1. And 2 of these guys also worked primarily on Subnautica Below Zero, which was the prequel, I believe, to Subnautica 1. Both great games, were ejected from the company, and they instead put in Steve Paputzis, he's been around for a very long time. He worked on, Striking Distance Studios, so a lot of Dead Space and also Callisto Protocol. Personally, for me, I'm not really super impressed by his background. I think Callisto Protocol was a very poorly managed game that released in a very buggy state that was just kind of a mess from the start. The gameplay was kind of uninspired. The atmosphere was cool. The Dead Space vibes were strong, but the basic gameplay and combat was very rote and simplistic, and there were a ton of issues. Like, I had to restart my save several times playing through Callisto Protocol because there were so many issues with the game. Crashes, bugs, glitches, getting stuck in walls. Like, it just wasn't a well-delivered game on launch in general. So removing the 3 original creators for Subnautica so they could bring in this outside CEO to run the project and run the game and the studio is a very scary thing in general. Now, there's a lot to talk about at this topic in general, is just what does this mean that the original creators for Subnautica are now removed from the company that they started, right? What does it mean about the new CEO coming in? How does this affect the overall development of Subnautica 2? And also, what does it mean for the release date, right? Like, we understand how eager our community is to dive into the underworld world of Subnautica 2, and we're working diligently to deliver an experience that meets those expectations. This even led to people boycotting the game in general. This was a post that was up on PC Gaming until a couple hours ago. It's like this morning, the poster Peter Rock Life ended up deleting this, but if you go on the Wayback Machine, you can actually see it on here. But the call here was that with the original CEO and some of the C-suite being fired effective immediately, it didn't seem like it was amicable. There was no shout outs. People were calling for you to remove your Subnautica 2 wish list. Don't pre-order pre-order, don't buy it, share this post. And this post specifically, before it was deleted, 0.9 thousand upvotes, and people agreeing with this in general, saying, hey, like, what's going on with this? Why are they doing this? What does this mean for the game? And people talking about, is this good? Is it bad? Is this just kind of general, like, moving people around at the C-suite level, but it doesn't really affect the overall game development? And to be honest, I was content to leave it there. This could just be internal workings. Sometimes people just want to move on to other things. Obviously, the people that created Subnautica originally, at least from a leadership role, love games. They love making games. A lot of them have a long history of working on mods and hiring people that work on mods. They very clearly love games in general, so it's not all that surprising to see them kind of shift around. And maybe they just wanted something new. They wanted to buy out and get their shares or their equity converted into liquidity so they could buy a new home or support their family or whatever. Like, there's plenty of things that could go into this, and without knowing the actual details of what's going on, it's kind of hard to say whether this was a good or bad thing. So I was content to leave the story there and not really cover it on my channel in general until Charlie Cleveland, one of the guys that was ejected from the company just before Subnautica 2 launched, put out a post and broke the silence. So this is when things get a little bit more juicy and the tea comes out. So he puts out this post that says, what is a wave but 1,000 drops? And he talks about his history of working on several games. I don't even know that he worked on games like Aquarium Fighter or even like Natural Selection. Like, I actually love Natural Selection. It was such an amazing mod. They did Natural Selection 2 as well, which is super, super cool. So the fact that Charlie, I didn't even know Charlie worked on that, but he talked about his history of just being in games for more than 25 years, back before there were any ways to learn how to do it. He was just, you know, boots on the ground learning how to do it. He spent time making games and they failed a bunch. They did games in the 90s, in the 2000s, in the 2010s. Some games they spent, you know, 5 years working on, they flopped and did nothing. And he's still like hurt about it. Still like butthurt about it in general. And he's saying that now that we're halfway to 2026 and the world is a very different place, anyone can learn how to make games, and making games turn a profit is incredibly brutal, which is very true. You know, without realizing it, he started Unknown World in 2001 by making Natural Selection. They worked on games over and over and over. By the way, if you've never seen Natural Selection, it is one of the few asymmetrical games that has done well or relatively well over the history. We've seen many of asymmetrical games, and what I mean by asymmetrical is that it's a PvP game where both teams are not equivalent, right? So if you think about Dead by Daylight, Identity 5, VHS, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, the Evil Dead game, like all of those games that are asymmetrical, most of them flop because asymmetrical is just a very hard genre to get right. But Natural Selection was awesome. It was Marines versus aliens. It was super cool. They even did Natural Selection 2, and I even played games like Savage 1 and Savage 2, which were also asymmetrical, and it's one of the few that worked there as well. So he just talks about how much he loves games, that for a while he worked on an $18,000 salary. Community members were sending in like just bills, like money in the mail, so they could like afford to eat for the day so they could work on the game, and they're super excited about it. He also talks about how it wouldn't have happened without Max McGuire, one of the other folks that was ejected from the company and replaced with the Callisto Protocol CEO. They made just enough money to get Subnautica into a stripped down early access, barely got it there, and then got it out into the public. And he puts out a super heartfelt message saying the community helped guide us forward until we found something we all loved, that the community was a big part of building Subnautica 1 and what made it so great over the time. Like Subnautica 1, even below zero, they do this thing where they launch an early access, then they spend like a year or two working with the community to make it great, finding bugs, adding features, and doing everything that the community really loves, and they really enjoy that process. And he says that he doesn't want to create like drama, but he says this because making games is something that he's passionate about, that he really enjoys, and it's in his blood. So is iteration and early access, and we've thrived on that kind of process. Even admitting that there were games that they worked on for 5 years, like this one here, which was Moonbreaker. They thought they knew better. They thought they had it lined up. They were wrong about what people wanted out of the game, and it just launched after 5 years and did nothing. But he still is like emotional about it, but still cares a lot about the games that he's doing. doing. Going on to say that I hope you can see why we were so excited to release Subnautica 2 into early access this year. Many of the folks that started the journey with us nearly 20 years ago have worked hard on Subnautica 2, and they've joined some incredible new talent who are drawn to the studio by the love of games. He talks about how like they hired people that worked on mods for the games that they were working on, or people that had come up with mod options for the games that they had released, and they hired them on because they were passionate the same way they were, and that's kind of how that started. So you can see why for Max, Ted, myself, and the Unknown Worlds team, these are the three guys that got fired from their own company, from, I'm guessing, the board of directors for our community. The events this week have been quite a shock. We know the game is ready for early access now. So he's saying that the game is ready to go in early access like today. It's ready to go. It's ready to start the early access process. And we know that you're ready to play it. And while we thought this was going to be our decision, that decision is in Krafton's hands. There's nothing can do it because they were ejected from the company. After all these years, to find that I'm no longer able to work at the company I started stings. And he just wants to say that I want you to know that whatever happens to the founders, to the team, and to the game, our priority is and has always been to make the best game we can for the best community in the world. To add to this, I found this old post from when Krafton had acquired Unknown Worlds. Like they actually did the buyout. This was in 2021, October 29th, so the end of 2021. So basically, 4 years ago that they got the acquisition. So Krafton bought this, and they, with this original post from 4 years ago, they say that they affirm its commitment to driving future content development by adding industry visionaries to its collective of independent video game studios. And in this, they even promise that they are going to allow, Unknown Worlds to drive their own games and not really have a hands-on approach. Unknown Worlds was founded by Charlie Cleveland and Max McGuire, two of the three guys that were ejected last week in 2001, and it created the Half-Life mod Natural Selection. We already talked about this. And are incredibly skilled and passionate developers with unparalleled gift for creativity and a proven track record of building successful player-driven worlds. Even have Charlie Cleveland saying, like the guy that wrote that heartfelt Reddit post that we just talked about, it was immediately apparent how closely Unknown Worlds and Krafton are aligned in the way that we think about games and game development. Subnautica and PUBG both started humbly and evolved successfully through constant iteration and feedback. So by the way, Krafton they are the parent company. PUBG Studios, Striking Distance for like Callisto Protocol, Blue Hole, Rising Wings, Dream Motion. So talking about PUBG here for the PUBG Studios in general. And we want to bring new games to the world stage. And with Krafton, we're a big step closer. We're truly looking forward to our future together. And it's kind of bittersweet to read this from 4 years ago, where Charlie is saying this, knowing that 4 years in the future after this post, that he would be kicked out of his own company by Krafton, and then taking the CEO from Striking Distance and placing them in place of them for their own company. Now, they've done a couple dev updates showing off like the work they've done on Subnautica 2, how they bring it all together. And honestly, a lot of the gameplay that they've shown looks like the game is in a really good spot in general. Now, it's hard to tell from the footage they show us. It could be doctored, or, it could just be a slice, demo, like a minimum viable product that they want to work on. But basically what we've seen from them so far is that the game is very close to early access and should be launching soon. A lot of people, myself included, were expecting it for summer. Like I was actually expecting, Subnautica 2 to be out June, July, like around now would be the early access for Subnautica 2. They added a bunch of cool new features for Subnautica 2, multiplayer, being able to zoom around with your friends and be inside of your ships, collecting things together and having that be a part of it. Subnautica 1 and, Below Zero had these like cool pods where you could put items in it and it would show up for other players. Kind of like how FromSoft handles multiplayer, like echoes of other players and messages on the ground, like indirect contact with other players while still having a single player game in general. But what I've seen so far looks really, really good, and I think they're pretty excited about it. The other thing that's worth talking about is this right here, which is the Subnautica mobile game. This just launched on app platforms, I believe yesterday. They had kind of put it out for early access on the app platforms on mobile like last week, but I think it's now officially available on your Android and iOS platforms. And it's basically Subnautica 1 on mobile. And I'm wondering if they ended up delaying the launch of Subnautica 2 early access so they could get more eyes and visibility on the Subnautica mobile mobile game. And there's also rumors that potentially that they had disagreements internally on whether they want to, add microtransactions or monetization schemes to Subnautica 2 before launching it, and whether they want to get that into the early access before the game launches. Generally with, monetization schemes, especially if you know that players are not going to be very happy about it and not very on board with it, you want to have it in the game from the start, because adding it later becomes infinitely more difficult and you'll end up pissing your player base off. And so a lot of companies, especially if they're looking to hyper monetize things, they'll try to have those systems in the game from the jump so that players can acquiesce and accept them and digest them a little bit easier, rather than having to try and force it onto them later on. So maybe that's part of the discussion. It's hard to know what goes on internally, but the tea doesn't stop there. So we had last week where the 3 executives were ejected from the company, and then we had a couple days ago where one of them broke the silence and talked about how bittersweet it was and how it wasn't really like what they wanted and they were forced out against their will. And then we had even more, like a super secret, if you weren't paying attention, one of the staffers on the Subnautica 2 Discord ended up kind of leaking some details on what's going on. So Pebble203, one of the Discord mods for Subnautica 2, confirmed a bunch of stuff. Now it's kind of, you want to take this at face value, but there's definitely going to be a degree of skepticism, right? Because how much information does a Discord mod know about the game, and how in the know are they about some of the inner workings, especially at the higher leadership level, that can change things on a dime, and there's nothing anyone can do to defy them because they own the company and they write your paychecks. But this is kind of encouraging and a little bit counter to the dooming that we're seeing as well. So Pebble claims that early access will release this year. No crunching is needed. Everything is on track for a 2025 release without rushing. The parent company of Unlimited Worlds, they don't have a hand in development. They only do PR, publishing, budgeting, etc. So they're talking about crafting here. She goes on to say that only that they were working in Subnautica 2 anyway. Still sad they're gone, but Subnautica 2 is not affected. So they're saying that the 3 executives that were ejected from Unknown Worlds were not actively working on Subnautica 2. I find that hard to believe. I mean, I do believe that they're not sitting down, bringing up the engine and, messing with the packages and submitting change lists on their own. But I don't know if I fully believe that they had no involvement in Subnautica 2 whatsoever, considering the post that Charlie put out and how hands-on they've been for game development over the last 20 years or so. But so Pebble is claiming that the Subnautica 2 is completely unaffected by this change. She even says that everything is on track for a 2025 release without rushing or crunching, and the players will play a major role in the shaping of the game, providing feedback as the developers work, allowing them to fix issues, rework stuff, and add highly requested features. Charlie Cleveland directed and overlooked the development of Subnautica 1 and Below Zero. Max McGuire was a major technical engineer for the team. Charlie was working on film production and Subnautica brand, while Max was working on other projects within Unknown Worlds. Ted Gill was the president, not a developer. Pebble even claims that the game developers are all the same. The Subnautica team was not changed in the slightest, so they had no shifts, no change, no new hires, no fires, no repositionings, nothing. That only the executive suite was swapped out for a new CEO, and the core dev team is the same. And obviously, like, this could certainly be true. There's just a question of, if these people are the kind of people that create games like Subnautica, very passionate game developers with a long storied history of it, for them to be completely uninvolved in the project they're working on and to be ejected from a company they started while still posting bittersweet goodbyes, saying that they didn't want this to happen. They're stung by it, they're hurt by it, and they're confused by it, and they wish they could stay on to it. All of this just doesn't, like, the math isn't mathing here. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that, if they were completely dejected and saying that they wanted to move on to something else, I can understand that. It happens all the time with executives, that they've been working on one game title for 15 years and they're sick of it. They just want to, liquidate their equity in the company and move on to something else. Happens all the time. Not really a big deal, but it doesn't seem like that's what happened here. She even goes on to say that crafting doesn't impact the development either. Unknown Worlds is an independent studio, and crafting has no influence over it. This one is probably the hardest pill for me to swallow from her right now, is just because you have a publisher that owns your company, but they don't have any fingers in the pie. They don't control anything on the development. They have no influence. I don't think I've ever seen this happen ever in any publisher developer relationship. even if it's like a 30% involvement, they want to control like when things launch, they want things changed. Every publisher I've ever worked with has always wanted changes and has always had some degree of involvement in the development of the game. So to say that Unknown Worlds is completely independent and Krafton is not involved at all, I think is a bit intense of a statement. She even says that they only do PR and publishing and resources, and they only do the boring paperwork of the business side of game development. She even says that they only change CEOs, not the whole team. There's no cause for concern. Now, to be honest, Subnautica has always been an iterative process. Even with Subnautica 1, and even I remember with Subnautica Below Zero, they ended up retconning the entire story. Like, they changed the main character, reworked the sub-characters, rewrote the entire story during early access. So Below Zero changed a lot during that process as part as the players giving feedback and being part of that. So I totally believe that they're going to launch in early access and they will have that iterative process, but I don't think that it's unfounded that people are concerned about this situation, that the original passionate, like tent-pole developers that worked on the games that made them special over the years, them being forcibly removed against their will is a good thing that can be completely written off and ignored. Now, there's still a possibility that Subnautica 2 hits early access, that it's just banging, like it's so amazing and awesome and everything's fine and nothing is amiss. It's just kind of a bummer for the people that started the company, and that's just how business goes. Sometimes people get removed and people get replaced and that sort of thing. But there's also a possibility that we lost kind of the core heart of what made Subnautica and Subnautica Below Zero so special. So let me know what you think about this development, the story, and the process for Subnautica 2. If you are worried about it, or you're just kind of like, hey man, it's just business, whatever. As long as the game comes out and it's awesome, that's all I care about. And maybe they're on the track for doing that as well. It seems like the core developers are still working on the project and the timeline hasn't changed, though we still don't have an exact date for early access release for Subnautica 2. It sounds like it's still going to be this year, though granted, there's only 5 months left of this year, so this year as a statement is quickly fading away. You would think that it sounded like they were targeting a summer release, but summer's ending, right? We're in July right now. So as we go into quarter 3 and we're pushing towards quarter 4, the question is, when does Subnautica 2 hit early access and what state is it in when it finally comes out? So let me know what your take is on this. If you're concerned, if you're not, or if you're somewhere in between, where you sit with this, and also what your expectations are for Subnautica 2 in the future. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.